to assume maybe that this is happening far away and will not have a direct impact on us here in Ireland, it is likely to have a direct impact on every single person listening to this show. Here to explain why and to what degree, John Fitzgerald, Adjunct Professor in Economics at Trinity College Dublin. John, we're talking about energy and energy supply. I mean, how much does Europe and does Ireland rely on Russia for our energy needs at the moment?
Well, the really important one is gas. Europe gets 30 to 40% of its gas from Russia, and Russia started choking off supplies last autumn, or restricting supplies. So Russia was preparing for this crisis in the Ukraine. So already the rise in energy prices, in particular gas and electricity prices, has been driven by Russian policy leading up to what's happening in Ukraine. The next big stage is, and obviously the potential for huge loss of life and awful consequences in Europe aside, on terms of energy, Russia has the ability to choke off 30 to 40% of Europe's gas supplies, or alternatively, Europe might, through sanctions, restrict supplies of gas from Russia. Such a big reduction in supply would have huge consequences for the European economy. And for that reason, Putin might well use it as an instrument.
Yeah, and this, none of us know exactly how this is all going to play out over the next few days. I'm just watching Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, speaking at the moment. So this has all to play out. There will be sanctions, we know that. Whether we inevitably end up with some form of a land war, we don't know. But let's assume for a moment that tap is turned off by Vladimir Putin, that 30 to 40% of Europe's gas disappears overnight. What happens then?
Well, Europe has an arrangement where if there is a shortage, Europe will share out the supplies equitably among EU members. And I would envisage that because Ukraine gets all its gas from Russia, if they're cut off, Europe will supply Ukraine. So they'll be cut in on the deal. Obviously, from our point of view, we get 30% of our gas roughly from the Coral field off the west coast, but that's running down and it's only 30%. The rest comes through pipelines. In the United Kingdom. I would expect that the United Kingdom would unusually participate in any European sharing out of gas.
Oh, do you think so?
First of all, the UK imports gas from the rest of Europe. So if they started being mean to Ireland, Europe might start being mean to the United Kingdom. Also remember, the electricity supply is an island supply. So if the United Kingdom cuts off gas to Ireland, they'll be cutting off electricity in Northern Ireland. So no, I think the United Kingdom strategically will participate in any sharing out. But the sharing out would have major consequences for us all. 30% less gas. What do? We will probably prioritise electricity. But it means that the alternative to sharing it out and rationing is a massive further rise in price. And I don't think that would be the best solution for anybody. So, but rationing is complicated with gas because how do you prevent people say, all right, you can heat your house today, but not tomorrow? How do you make that happen? I don't know. So the logistics of a shortage of gas will be complicated.
I'm not remembering myself, but I'm recalling stories out of the Glimmerman walking around Dublin City during the war to make sure people's stoves weren't on.
Yeah, during the Second World War, because of shortages of fuel, gas was rationed and you were only allowed to use a certain amount of gas. And it was regulated. There was what was called the Glimmerman, who would go to check whether there was a glimmer of gas being burnt in your house, and they could go around to houses and check people out. And there was pretty widespread observance that people didn't burn gas when they shouldn't burn gas. But it turned out long after the war, there were only 2 Glimmermen, so actually the enforcement was weak. But as with COVID, people did the right thing. But hoping for people to do the right thing may be more complicated with their heating.
Let's imagine, that the government can somehow manage this kind of the rationing of gas. They work out how people can turn on and off their gas and when they do it. And it all is deemed fair. I'm not sure you could find a perfect solution to this, but let's imagine it just for a moment. I mean, I assume that the economy kind of slowly grinds to a halt if we've only got kind of gas on it, every second day in people's homes and offices and what have you.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure that it is safe to ration gas and say it's not on today and on tomorrow, but that's a separate issue. Which
because of air in pipes and that type of thing.
Yeah. So I don't know even logistically how you do it. It is likely that industry will be severely restricted, which would affect, say, production of dairy processing uses a lot of heat, a lot of industry. So I think it would have fairly widespread effects on the European economy, not just the Irish economy, if there was a shortage. Now, looking at it from Putin's point of view, if he pulls the plug on this, short term, he can cause chaos in Europe. But what Europe will do will be invest in liquefied natural gas and start importing their gas long term. And Russia would suffer a permanent loss of income in the long term. But I think Putin is thinking pretty short term at the moment.
Well, okay, so we know the Russian economy is not as big as it once was. I think it's smaller than the Italians. It's about the 12th to 13th largest in the world. A lot of their foreign exchange wealth, though, has been built up on the sale of gas and oil and other natural resources. So, yeah, maybe he won't want to undermine that economic prosperity or what little of it still exists. But let's say it does happen. And again, we find ourselves in a situation where the pipeline has been turned off and this becomes a protracted situation. I assume, and look, environmentalists and understandably will be jumping up and down about this, I assume we're going to see big container ships full of coal travelling around the world and some of them stopping at Money Point.
Well, Money Point will certainly be on full-time burning coal, which is very bad for emissions. I think one of the things that will happen, there's this EU agreement that we share out gas. There is also International Energy Agency agreement, which would include the United States. And it could be that there would be a sharing of gas worldwide to deal with the problem. When New Orleans was wiped out by a hurricane, and there were major problems with refineries on the east coast of the United States.
Yeah.
Europe actually supplied diesel to the United States under this emergency agreement. So there are provisions for dealing with crises, and they could well come into play.
Yeah. But Ireland, and you kind of touched on it there, I mean, Ireland long-term burning large amounts of coal at Money Point, I assume would spell the end of any ambition to meet our climate action targets, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but that's this year that we will our emissions will be extremely high. But longer term, if Russia is no longer a reliable source of gas, we will source gas elsewhere in the world. There will be a redirection. I don't see coal as being first of all, from a climate point of view, it's a disaster.
Yeah.
So I don't see us shifting more to coal. I think we will shift our source of energy and gas elsewhere. And obviously, if we have lots of storms every 2 days, lots of wind, we'll have lots of wind electricity and we won't need the coal. But I think it's calm outside my house at the moment.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much wind can take over.